The coffee machine hissed behind me, drowning out the soft music playing in the hotel lobby. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear as I balanced the tray of welcome drinks, my fingers cramping from the weight. 6 hours into my first shift at the Crescent Hotel, and my feet were already screaming in protest inside my new shoes. "Table 4, Sophia," Marcus called from behind the counter. I nodded, forcing a smile despite the exhaustion that hung on me like a second skin. The lobby was unusually busy for a Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and privilege. My uniform clung uncomfortably to my back, damp with sweat from rushing between tables. "Here you go," I said, placing the last champagne flute on the table, careful not to spill it. The businessman barely looked up from his phone, just a grunt of acknowledgement. Invisible as always. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The grand entrance doors opened, letting in a gust of cool autumn air that crawled across my skin. Conversations dimmed. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. I turned, curious about the sudden change. 2 men entered first. Tall, broad-shouldered figures in tailored suits, their eyes scanning the room with calculated precision. They moved with purpose, taking positions near the entrance. Security. Not the hotel kind, but the dangerous kind that made your instincts scream, "Threat." And then he walked in. Even if he hadn't been flanked by bodyguards, I would have noticed him. He commanded attention without asking for it. Dressed in a midnight blue suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Dark hair, meticulously styled, framed a face that belonged on a movie screen. But it was his eyes that caught me. Steel gray, watchful, eerily calm. The eyes of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I quickly looked away, feeling inexplicably exposed, as if those eyes could see every struggle, every worry, every secret I'd ever kept. My hands trembled slightly as I collected empty glasses from a nearby table. "Sophia," Marcus hissed, appearing beside me so suddenly I nearly dropped a flute. "That's Dominic Vega. The Vega family practically owns this city." The name meant nothing to me, and my blank expression must have shown it. "Jesus, you don't know. They don't exactly advertise in the yellow pages, if you get what I mean." A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard rumors, of course. Everyone in the city had. Businesses that mysteriously changed hands overnight. Politicians who suddenly changed their votes on key issues. I watched as the hotel manager himself rushed forward, practically bowing as he greeted Vega. The cold-eyed man barely acknowledged him, handing over what appeared to be a platinum credit card. The manager nodded repeatedly, then personally escorted him toward the private elevators that led to the penthouse suites. "Why is everyone so afraid of him?" I whispered to Marcus when I returned to the bar. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely audible. "Because people who cross the Vegas have a habit of disappearing. Permanently. And you've just been assigned as his personal server during his stay." 3 days passed, and I'd delivered room service to the penthouse suite 4 times. Each time, Dominic Vega had been on phone calls in Italian or staring at his laptop, barely acknowledging my presence beyond a curt nod. The suite, a sprawling luxury space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, felt more like a fortress than a hotel room. "Has he said anything to you?" Eliza, another server, asked breathlessly in the staff corridor. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fascination that I was coming to recognize as the standard response to the Vegas. "Just thank you once," I admitted, shrugging as if it were no big deal. What I didn't tell her was how his presence filled the room like a physical force, how my skin prickled with awareness whenever those gray eyes flickered in my direction. How I'd started noticing things, the way he always positioned himself with his back to a wall, how he checked his watch exactly every 30 minutes, the faint scar that ran along his right knuckle. On my 5th trip to the penthouse, everything changed. I arrived with his usual lunch order to find the suite door slightly ajar. My knuckles had barely grazed the wood when I heard raised voices inside, Dominic's controlled baritone contrasting with another man's frantic tenor. Something about shipments and payment deadlines. I should have backed away, should have returned later. Instead, I stood frozen, the silver tray heavy in my hands. The voices grew louder, and then there was a crash, glass shattering against a wall. My heart hammered against my ribs as footsteps approached the door. Before I could retreat, the door swung open. Dominic stood there, his expression thunderous before instantly smoothing into that unreadable mask when he saw me. Behind him, a thin man with sweat beading his forehead was frantically gathering papers from the floor. "Perfect timing," Dominic said, his voice deceptively soft. "Come in." The thin man scrambled to his feet, eyes darting between me and Dominic. "We're finished here anyway," Dominic continued, stepping aside to let me enter. "Aren't we, Carlo?" The man nodded frantically, clutching his papers as he edged toward the door. "Yes, Mr. Vega. I'll have it resolved by tonight." As Carlo hurried past me, I noticed his hands shaking. I kept my eyes down, focusing on setting the tray on the dining table without rattling the silverware. The sound of the door closing echoed through the suite, and I realized with a jolt that I was alone with Dominic Vega. "You're new," he said, the statement hanging in the air between us. Not a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, sir. I started this week." His eyes assessed me, a flicker of interest disrupting their usual coldness. "Your name?" "Sophia," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded despite the nervous flutter in my chest. He nodded once, as if filing away the information. "You've been bringing my meals." Again, not a question, but I nodded. Something shifted in his expression as he glanced at the broken glass near the wall. "I apologize for the scene you walked into. Business disagreements can get heated." The unexpected apology caught me off guard, as did the faint trace of what might have been embarrassment in his tone. I moved to clean up the broken glass, but Dominic raised his hand to stop me. "Leave it. That's not your job." He walked to the window, his silhouette stark against the cityscape. "You've maintained your composure every time you've entered this room, despite the obvious tension." "That's rare." His observation hung in the air as he turned to face me. "I have a proposition for you, Sophia." My heart stuttered in my chest. What kind of proposition could someone like him possibly offer someone like me? I braced myself, remembering all the rumors that swirled around the Vega name. I need a personal assistant during my extended stay in this city. Someone discreet, someone who doesn't flinch easily. His eyes held mine, searching for something. Someone exactly like you. The salary he named made me blink twice to ensure I'd heard correctly. It was 5 times what I made at the hotel. I should have said no immediately. Working directly for a man rumored to have connections to organized crime was either incredibly stupid or incredibly dangerous. Possibly both. Yet the thought of returning to my cramped apartment, to the mountain of unpaid medical bills from my mother's cancer treatments, made me hesitate. "I don't know anything about being a personal assistant," I admitted, clutching the empty serving tray like a shield. He smiled then, a brief flash that transformed his face before vanishing. "You know how to be invisible when needed and present when required. The rest can be learned." A business card appeared between his fingers, heavy cream cardstock with only a phone number embossed in silver. "Think about it overnight. Call that number with your answer by noon tomorrow." As he pressed the card into my palm, our fingers brushed, sending an unexpected jolt of warmth through my hand. That night, I paced my tiny apartment, the business card lying on my kitchen table like a live grenade. Taking this job would mean stepping into Dominic Vega's world, a world I knew nothing about beyond whispered rumors and frightened glances. But staying at the hotel meant watching my mother's medical bills pile higher, while the treatments drained away her strength and my savings. My phone rang just after midnight, startling me from my thoughts. "Unknown number," I answered cautiously, hearing only silence for several seconds. Then my mother's voice, weak but excited. "Sophia, the doctor just called. They've approved me for the experimental treatment, but our insurance won't cover it." After ending the call, I stared at the business card, tracing the embossed number with my fingertip. The experimental treatment was her best hope, and completely out of reach on my current salary. By dawn, my decision was made. At exactly noon, I called the number, my voice steadier than I felt. "I accept your offer," I said when Dominic answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "When do I start?" His reply was immediate, his tone satisfied but not surprised. "A car will pick you up tomorrow morning at 7. Pack enough for a week. We're going to my estate in the mountains." The estate turned out to be a modernist mansion perched on a mountainside, all glass and steel and stone, surrounded by acres of pristine wilderness. It made the luxury penthouse look modest by comparison. Inside, minimalist furniture and priceless art pieces created an atmosphere of restrained opulence. "Your living quarters are in the East Wing," Dominic said as he led me through the house. "My office and private rooms are in the West Wing. You'll have access to both when your duties require it." He showed me to a suite that was larger than my entire apartment, with a private balcony overlooking a crystalline lake. My duties, as it turned out, were surprisingly legitimate. I managed his calendar, arranged transportation, coordinated with his security team, and handled correspondence that didn't require his direct attention. No illegal activities, no suspicious packages, nothing that aligned with the rumors that had made hotel staff whisper behind their hands. Days passed in a rhythm of early mornings and late nights. I learned that Dominic rose at precisely 5 a.m. every day, worked out in his private gym, and required a double espresso, no sugar, delivered to his office by 6:30. I learned that he spoke 4 languages fluently and read voraciously, his nightstand always stacked with history books and classic literature. What I couldn't learn was the man behind the mask. Dominic maintained a careful distance, professional and courteous, but never warm. The rare occasions when our fingers accidentally brushed while exchanging documents sent that same inexplicable jolt through me, but his expression never changed, giving nothing away. One night, working late in his study, I found him standing before the fireplace, staring at an old photograph. I quietly placed the documents he'd requested on his desk, intending to slip out unnoticed, when he spoke without turning. "Do you know what it's like to have a legacy thrust upon you, Sophia? A path you never chose but can't escape?" The vulnerability in his voice stopped me in my tracks. For the first time, he sounded human rather than the cold, controlled figure I'd come to know. "My father died when I was 11, I said quietly. "Left us with nothing but debts. So no, not the same kind of legacy. But I understand having your life shaped by circumstances beyond your control." He turned then, studying me with new interest, the photograph still clutched in his hand. It showed a young boy with Dominic's eyes standing beside an older man with a stern expression. "My grandfather," he explained, following my gaze. "He built this family's empire from nothing, sacrificed everything, including his soul, if you believe the stories. The grandfather's reputation was legendary in the city, a ruthless businessman who'd crushed competitors and built an empire through means few dared to question. And now you're expected to maintain that empire," I observed. He nodded once, setting down the photograph with careful precision. "I was supposed to be a professor of literature," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. "I had acceptance letters from 3 universities when my father was killed. The family business required immediate attention. The implication hung in the air between us. His father's death had not been natural. After that night, something shifted between us. The professional barrier remained, but occasionally I'd catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the day's work was done, he'd ask my opinion on the book he was reading, or share a memory from before he became the cold figure the world now feared. The attack came without warning. I was returning from a brief shopping trip in the nearby town when I noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked half-hidden among the trees near the estate's entrance. Before I could reach for my phone to alert security, 2 men emerged from the vehicle, weapons visible in their waistbands. My driver cursed, swerving off the main road onto a hidden access path I hadn't known existed. "Get down," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fear. I dropped to the floor as bullets shattered the rear window, glass raining down on me in tiny, stinging fragments. Everything happened in a blur after that. The car skidding to a stop at a service entrance, the driver practically dragging me inside, security personnel rushing past us with weapons drawn. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the staccato rhythm of gunfire echoing through the mountains. I was ushered into a panic room concealed behind a bookcase in Dominic's study, the heavy door sealing with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, monitors displayed camera feeds from around the property. I watched, heart hammering, as Dominic's security team engaged the intruders in a firefight near the main gate. When the door finally opened, it was Dominic himself who entered, his suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. A thin line of blood traced his temple where something had grazed him. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning me with an intensity that made me shiver. "No, I'm fine," I managed, though my voice betrayed my shock. "What happened? Who were they?" He didn't answer immediately, instead reaching out to brush glass fragments from my hair, his touch surprisingly gentle. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, not the cold control I was accustomed to, but a burning rage barely contained. "The Moretti family," he finally said, his voice deceptively calm. "They've been trying to move into our territory for months. This was their warning shot." He withdrew his hand, curling it into a tight fist at his side. "You could have been killed because of me, because of what I am." The realization crashed over me. This wasn't about business in the conventional sense. This was about territory, about power, about the underworld empire his grandfather had built. "You're not just a businessman," I whispered. the truth I'd been avoiding finally impossible to ignore. The rumors about your family, they're true. His jaw tightened, eyes hardening to steel. Yes. Does that change things for you, Sophia? Now that you've seen the reality of my world? There was something beneath the question, a tension that suggested my answer mattered more than it should, that somehow my opinion had come to hold weight with a man who seemed to care about no one's judgment. Despite everything, the gunfire, the danger, the confirmation of who he truly was, I found myself stepping closer rather than backing away. I've known who you were from the beginning, I admitted. I just didn't want to acknowledge it because it made my decision to work for you complicated. He studied me for a long moment, confusion briefly replacing the anger in his eyes. Then understanding dawned. Your mother's medical bills, he said softly. That's why you took this job. I nodded, suddenly embarrassed by my transparency. The experimental treatment cost more than I could make in 5 years at the hotel. Something changed in Dominic's expression, a softening around the eyes, a brief vulnerability before the mask slipped back into place. Why didn't you tell me? I could have... He stopped himself, turning away to stare at the security monitors. It doesn't matter. What matters is keeping you safe. The following morning, I found an envelope on my desk containing confirmation of payment for my mother's entire treatment plan. No note, no explanation, just the hospital's letterhead and a receipt marked paid in full. When I confronted Dominic in his office, he barely glanced up from his laptop. Consider it hazard pay. I don't want your charity, I insisted, placing the envelope on his desk. His eyes finally met mine, a flash of irritation crossing his features. It's not charity. It's compensation for putting you in danger. Accept it or don't, but don't mistake it for something it's not. The wall between us had never felt higher, yet something had undeniably shifted. In the days that followed, Dominic insisted I learn self-defense from his head of security and always carry the panic button he'd had programmed to alert him directly. The lessons were grueling, but I threw myself into them, determined to never feel as helpless as I had during the attack. 2 weeks after the incident, we returned to the city. The penthouse felt smaller after the mountain estate, but Dominic seemed more at ease here, less burdened by family ghosts. One night I was working late in the living room when he emerged from his office, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in hand. Join me, he said. Not quite a request, but not quite a command either. He poured a second glass, handing it to me as I settled onto the sofa opposite him. The whiskey burned pleasantly, warming me from the inside. We sat in comfortable silence until he spoke again. I received word today that Antonio Moretti has reached out for a meeting. My grip tightened on the glass. The man who ordered the attack? Dominic nodded, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. He claims it was a misunderstanding, that his men were acting without authorization. His tone made it clear he didn't believe this for a second. What will you do? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Dominic's eyes met mine, searching, as if gauging how much truth I could handle. In the old days, my grandfather's day, there would be only one response to such a transgression. Blood for blood. I studied his face in the low light, the sharp angles softened by shadows, the burden of legacy visible in the tight set of his jaw. But you're not your grandfather, I said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I had seen what he tried so hard to conceal. No, he agreed after a long pause. I'm trying to build something different. But this world doesn't forgive perceived weakness. If I accept Moretti's excuses, others will see it as an invitation. He set down his glass, leaning forward. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the reality of who I am, what I do. There are aspects of my business that operate outside the law. The confession hung between us, a final barrier removed. I know who you are, Dominic, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. I've always known. Something unspoken passed between us, a current of tension and understanding that had been building since that first day in the hotel lobby. Before I could process what was happening, he was beside me on the sofa, his hand cupping my face with unexpected gentleness. You should fear me, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion I'd never heard before. Everyone else does. Instead of pulling away, I leaned into his touch, drawn by the vulnerability beneath the power. The kiss happened without warning. One moment we were sitting in charged silence. The next his lips were on mine, tentative at first, then with growing urgency. The whiskey glass fell from my hand, forgotten as I curled my fingers into his shirt, pulling him closer. Years of isolation and control seemed to crumble as he gathered me against him, his heartbeat racing beneath my palm. When we finally broke apart, breathless and disoriented, something like panic flashed across his face. "This was a mistake," he said, the walls slamming back into place so quickly I could almost hear them. He stood abruptly, putting distance between us. "You'll never have my heart, Sophia. It's not mine to give." The words stung more than they should have, revealing feelings I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. "I didn't ask for it," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I gathered the fallen glass, grateful it hadn't broken, focusing on the task to hide the hurt in my eyes. Dominic ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the usually perfect strands. "You don't understand. In my world, attachments are weaknesses to be exploited. What happened at the estate proves that. If my enemies knew I cared for you..." He stopped, seeming surprised by his own admission. Morning arrived with awkward silences and careful distance. Dominic retreated into cold professionalism, burying himself in work, while I tried to ignore the phantom sensation of his lips against mine. 3 days of strained interactions later, he informed me that we would be attending a charity gala that evening, a rare public appearance he couldn't avoid. The gown he had delivered to my room was midnight blue silk, elegant and understated. As I fastened my grandmother's silver pendant around my neck, the only piece of jewelry I owned with any sentimental value, I steeled myself for an evening of pretending that nothing had changed between us. The ballroom of the historic Belmont Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and the city's elite in their finest attire. I felt painfully out of place until Dominic's hand settled at the small of my back, warm and steadying. "You look beautiful," he murmured, so quietly I almost missed it. Before I could respond, we were approached by an older man whose smile didn't reach his calculating eyes. "Dominic Vega," the man said, extending his hand. "How generous of you to grace us with your presence." The subtle emphasis on generous suggested a double meaning. Dominic's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly as he shook the man's hand. "Antonio, I didn't expect to see you here." Ice ran through my veins as I realized this was Antonio Moretti, the man responsible for the attack at the estate. His eyes slid to me, assessing and dismissive in a single glance. "And who is this lovely creature?" The question dripped with condescension. "My personal assistant, Miss Bennett," Dominic replied, his tone neutral, but his grip on my waist tightening protectively. Moretti's eyebrows rose, a knowing smirk playing at his lips. "Just an assistant? How professional of you." The implication was clear and deliberately insulting. I expected Dominic to maintain his distance, to reinforce the barriers he'd erected between us. Instead, his arm slid fully around my waist, pulling me closer to his side. "Miss Bennett is very important to my organization," he said, each word precise and weighted. "And to me, personally." Moretti's smile faltered, his eyes darting between us with new calculation. "Is that so? How interesting." He raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. "To new alliances. Perhaps we should discuss ours soon, Dominic. Things are changing in this city." The drive back to the penthouse was thick with unspoken tension. Rain pattered against the windows of the car, blurring the city lights into watercolor smudges. "You shouldn't have done that," I finally said, breaking the silence, implying to Moretti that I mean something to you. "You painted a target on my back." Dominic's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his profile sharp in the passing streetlights. He already knew. The way he looked at you, his jaw clenched. He was testing me, seeing if he could use you to get to me, and he was right. We pulled into the private garage beneath the building, but Dominic made no move to exit the car after cutting the engine. "I've spent my entire adult life building walls," he said, staring straight ahead, "keeping people at a distance, showing no vulnerability, no weakness. It's how you survive in my world." Rain drummed on the roof, creating a cocoon of white noise around us. And then you walked into that hotel lobby, and for the first time in years I noticed someone, really noticed them. He turned to face me, his expression more open than I'd ever seen it. "You saw me. Not the name, not the reputation, not the legacy, just me." My heart hammered against my ribs as he reached across the console, taking my hand in his. That night on the sofa, when I said you'd never have my heart, his thumb traced circles on my palm, sending shivers up my arm. I was lying to myself as much as to you. The confession hung between us, fragile and monumental. "What about your enemies? The danger?" I whispered, giving him one last chance to retreat behind his walls. Instead, he leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup my cheek. "I'm tired of letting fear dictate my life, of sacrificing happiness for safety. he said, his voice rough with emotion. My grandfather built an empire on fear and blood. I want to build something different, something better. But I can't do that if I'm not willing to risk everything that matters. His lips found mine in the darkness, gentle at first, then with growing urgency as I responded. This kiss was different from our first. Not a moment of weakness, but a deliberate choice. A barrier willingly dismantled. When we finally broke apart, breathless and dizzy, the last of his walls had crumbled. The Morettis, the business, my family's legacy. None of it disappears because of how I feel about you, he warned, his forehead resting against mine. This won't be easy, Sophia. There will always be danger, always be complications. His eyes searched mine, looking for hesitation, for doubt. Instead, I tangled my fingers in his hair, drawing him back to me. I've never wanted easy, I whispered against his lips. I want real. I want you, all of you, not just the parts you think are safe to share. The smile that broke across his face transformed him, erasing years of isolation and control, revealing the man he might have been in another life. That night, as rain continued to fall outside the penthouse windows, Dominic Vega, the man who had once warned me I would never have his heart, surrendered it completely. And I, who had entered his world by chance and necessity, chose to stay by choice in love, knowing that some risks are worth taking, some hearts worth claiming, no matter how heavily guarded they might be. Thank you all so much for following this story. If you're enjoying it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, because your support is important for me to continue here.